Hi everyone, today I'm finally going to be doing my March wrap-up. So I have 7 books to talk about. I think I'll just sort of talk about them in themes. So I read 2 books from the International Booker Prize long list this month. The first one that I got to was one of the long list ones that didn't make it to the shortlist, which was Faces on the Tip of My Tongue by Emanuele Pagano, and this was translated by Jennifer Higgins and Sophie Lewis. So this book is basically interconnected short stories set in rural France about people on the edge of society, or sort of, a lot of them are kind of outcasts, but also it's sort of the setting itself is already a really isolated small community. The title is, I think, a good representation of the kind of characters you'll see in the book. People that you can barely remember, or that you feel like are sort of on the periphery because of the form of the story of the book. In having these interconnected short stories, you get to see the characters in various shapes and from different points of view because of the differing perspectives of the main characters in each story. Something that I really love in, for example, J.D. Salinger's short stories. But for me, the part of the problem with the concept is that it also causes the distance from the characters, and they feel emotionally lacking. And I think part of that is because of the periphery aspect, that the book takes the characters as if they're on the periphery and doesn't really allow you to get to know them. Therefore, I didn't feel like I cared about how they related to each other either. At the end of the book, the translators make a note about the editing process of this book, and basically they say that they cut a lot of the original book when they made this translation, and they argue for this because of the interconnectedness being more clear and more tangible with the cuts that they did, and the original book being a much bigger book. And I don't like that as an idea. I don't like abridged things in general. I don't really feel like I understand the purpose of it, because if you want a story, you would want it to be the way it's supposed to be told, and if you wanted a shorter story, you could always read a shorter story. It's kind of disappointing when the translation means that the translators are not even trying to make the original come to life in a different language. So that is sort of on a principle note. I didn't like this book, but even in terms of the writing and the characters, it just didn't do what it sort of set out to do very well. The other book that I read from the International Booker long list was The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, and this is translated by Stephen Snyder. The Memory Police is basically a sort of a dystopian in that it's set in a society where things are being forgotten. So basically what that means is that objects or things are disappearing, and with the physical disappearing of them, the memories connected with them are also disappearing, and the people in charge of making sure that happens is the memory police. There are a few people in the society that do remember, and they are in danger of the memory police because they're not allowed to exist. And so the book is both looking at the way that the society is changing and the way that it's sort of becoming smaller and smaller with each disappearance, and with the loss of memories, and also looking at 3 particular characters in the society. One who is remembering, and 2 characters trying to hide him away from the memory police. I feel like in terms of the concept and in the ideas that the book explores, I think is really interesting. I feel like Ogawa is a really imaginative writer, and the way she explores the importance that memory has, especially in human relationships, and how much of our connection with other people is based on our mutual past, I think, and communal past, I think is really wonderful. But for me, again, one of the issues I had is that the concept for me got in the way of an emotional response, so that the characters are losing their memories, and because of that they're also losing meaning and feelings alongside that. They're sort of becoming more apathetic as time goes on, and as a reader I also sort of felt that I couldn't connect with their sense of loss because they were already sort of not caring themselves. So I think for me, in terms of a novel of ideas, it was really interesting, but as a reading experience with characters, I just didn't really connect on a deeper level. So again, similar issue, but I think this is more worth your time than Faces on the Tip of the Tongue, that I wouldn't really recommend to anyone. Then I got to 2 books for Women's History Month, and they were both in my TBR that I made at the beginning of March. The first one is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. This is sort of a medicine nonfiction classic about Henrietta Lacks, whose cells were taken from her without consent while she was getting treatment for cancer, which she eventually died of. And so this book is both following Henrietta's life up to the point of her death and her health declining, but also following the life of the cells after they've taken from her and used for medical research. It's sort of split into several narratives because it's talking about Henrietta herself, it's talking about the cells and the origins of them up to the modern time, and sort of all of the important work that has been done on these cells and the important legacy that she has had. But it also looks at the family of Henrietta and their complicated feelings about the use of the cells and their experiences of really thoughtless behavior from doctors and from other medical professions, but also from journalists. I am so impressed by Rebecca Skloot in both all of the work that she put into creating this book. I think it was about 10 years of a working process to create this, and all of the research and the time that it took for Henrietta's family to trust her. But also this is a really angering and frustrating and saddening book to read because of the bad ways that people dealt with Henrietta's situation and with her families. So it raises really important questions in terms of ethics and medical profession, in terms of the question of consent and the need for cells for medical research. So sort of where the line is between the need itself for progress and for medicine, and for the privacy and right of the individual patient. This is not always the easiest book to read. In fact, I found it quite challenging to read, but I think I'm just so appreciative of what this book is. So I would strongly recommend this to basically everyone, since it tackles questions that we're all in one way or another having to face in terms of medicine. And then the other book that I read for Women's History Month is The Fossil Hunter by Shelley Emling. I read this together with Emma from A Cup of Books, and this is quite a brief biography of Mary Anning. It starts with her beginning interest in fossil hunting, something that she was introduced to by her father, and when he passed away quite early in her life, she decided to go on to do the fossil hunting in order to provide for her family, because they had quite a difficult economic situation after he died, and she basically made sure that they survived through the money that she made from her fossil hunting and the selling of those fossils. So this book is looking at Mary Anning's life and the development of her skill and the relationships that she built with a lot of important people within the academic field of paleontology and geology, and the role that she played in fossil discoveries and all of the theories building upon those discoveries. So it again is an example of a book that gives a voice to a woman who has been lost in history and sort of forgotten in history, which I really appreciated about it. I also think that Shelley Emling does a wonderful job at giving you the context of Mary Anning's story. So both in terms of the situational context, you are told things about Lyme Regis as a place, the fact that the fossil hunting was possible both because of the time and place, that it was just sort of the perfect timing to find fossils, but also that Mary Anning had a particular skill with doing this work. The fact that it was sort of a tourist location at the time, which meant that Mary Anning was able to sell small fossils that she found in order to get enough money to survive. But it also gives you some of the social and historical context, things like the role of women in science, the many limitations basically that women had in trying to participate in the academic field of the time, and especially science. You also get some of the science discourse of the time and the importance that the discoveries of the fossils had in changing perceptions about especially challenging Christian beliefs and the development of theories like the evolution theory. You get a clear sense that there's very little completely known about Mary Anning's life. There's very little documentation that Shelley Emling has to build this book upon. But I think what she has given you about Mary Anning's life is better understood through the context that she gives, what her findings meant in the context of the science discourse of the time, how she was able to do certain things because of the situation and time and place. So I think ultimately I was really impressed by what this author was able to accomplish with the little documentation and material that she had access to. Then I also read a e-galley this month, and that was American Animals, a true crime story by Eric Borsuk. This one came out at the last of March. So basically this one is about a man together with a few of his friends decided that they would try to make a heist. They wanted to steal some original Audubon paintings and some other manuscripts and things like that from a university museum to sell off and to make a lot of easy money. So it was a couple of university students who wanted to make this, and this book is basically the memoir of one of the guys and him talking about the process, the decision of actually doing the heist and all of the planning that they did in preparation for it, the actual heist situation, and the aftermath of that. It is so funny. I mean, it is, because it's a true crime, there's definitely certain things that is more on the serious side of things. He talks about the feeling of constantly feeling like you're stuck in this decision that you made and there's no turning back. Just having to sort of write it out, and the realization of all the things that you've given up for that kind of decision that comes quite late. You might not think about the long-term consequences as much when you're that young, and so I think this book shows a lot of that sort of negative experience of the crime itself, but also it's just so funny the way the author's humor is guiding the storytelling of this. It was just a laugh out loud funny. The humor is sort of self-deprecating, but also the absurdity of the situation a lot of the time was what was so funny. And I appreciated the author's ability to tell the story with so much humor, and also being humble enough to realize so many of the bad decisions that him and his friends made. So I found this a lot of fun, and if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, then I would definitely check it out. And then the last nonfiction book I read in March was Notes on Blindness, A Journey Through the Dark by John M. Hull. I read this for Curious Adventure, the second challenge, and I've actually done a video review of that, so I will link that. But basically this one is a memoir of the author's It's a memoir, but it's also a diary. I think it covers a couple of years of his life in the 80s. And he talks about so many things about the experience of being blind that I found, to use a not suitable word, eye-opening. I feel like I constantly use words to do with eyes and vision when I talk about this book without intending to, but he actually talks about that in the book as well, that there's so many words connected to vision and seeing. There are so many things about this book that I found interesting and educating. I think in particular, I learned a lot about the communication aspect from a blind person's perspective, especially in terms of like social aspects. I think he touches on so many things that we take for granted. So one of the situations he describes is when they have sort of a house party, and he feels so unable to follow the situation and the conversations going on because everyone is talking and moving and there's so much going on around him. So eventually he isn't able to even follow the threads, and so he just sort of becomes passive and ends up almost falling asleep. Even having some experience of vision impairment, I still felt like I learned so much and was so challenged through reading this book. And I really, really want to read more books on blindness experiences from blind people themselves. So if you have any recommendations for me, please let me know. The last book I want to talk about here is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So this one was so hyped before it came out, and I was really interested from hearing some good reviews of it. So I decided to listen to it as an audiobook. I'm really glad that I did, because the audiobook was really good. I actually talked about it in my recent audiobook recommendations video. But basically this follows a young girl who has a relationship with her teacher as a teenager, and then goes forward in time to when she's an adult, and another girl has accused the teacher of sexual assault, and there's some digging into the past, and you get the two timelines of her as a teenager and her as an adult, and you see the relationship with the teacher in both timelines. The scandal around the new accusations sort of forces her to rethink a lot of the things that she had thought about in terms of the beginning of their story. I felt like this book did a wonderful job at exploring the label of victim and the hesitation of a victim to claim themselves as such. The differing interpretations of a situation of sexual assault, especially of sexual abuse and of power abuse in a situation like this, where first of all the teacher has authority and power over the much younger student, but also there's a huge age gap. So there's several things in this that make the relationship very uneven. And I feel like the way that the young teenager sort of interprets the situation contrasted with the adult perspective was so well handled in this book, and I could really sense the inner turmoil of this character. I feel like in general this was such a close character study that it was really uncomfortable at times to read. It felt uncomfortable on so many levels, but in a very effective way, I think, for what it was trying to do. I just found it a really compelling narrative with really strong questions being raised, and being able to do so through the fictional lens that you probably wouldn't be able to do with a true story. I don't think that the author ever questions the idea of this being a crime. And that was another thing I really appreciate about this book, that even though it explores the internal struggles and interpretation and reaction that the character has of her situation and of the sexual abuse, there's never a question of this not being a crime and a use of someone in that situation. So I personally felt like this was really well done, and also, as I said, the audiobook was really good. So those are all of the books that I read in March, and I've already finished another one in April. So I would love to know if you've read any of these books or what you read in this strange month. I would love to know about that as well in the comments. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.